to The Hypnotist, the show that gives you inside access to cutting-edge hypnosis with real clients facing genuine issues. Brought to you by the hypnotherapist demanded by celebrities, CEOs, and even royalty, Adam Cox. These recordings took place live from Adam's clinic in London's world-famous Harley Street. So, get yourself comfortable and enjoy today's episode of The Hypnotist.
Hi, it's Adam here. Would you consider yourself a people pleaser? Maybe you really put other people's needs above your own, and not from a place of generosity, because some people do it because they feel like they have to, that other people's needs are more important than their own. It's their duty to be a bit of a martyr and to sacrifice themselves in order for other people. Now, if you can relate to this, I really think you're going to get some value from this hypnosis session, because I was working with a client that had been in that way ever since childhood, that they would always put their parents' needs above their own. And then when they got in a relationship, their husband's needs were always more important than their own. And they felt like a second-class citizen consistently. But here's the interesting thing. They had a belief that that is all that they are deserving of. And therefore, they would engineer unconsciously these situations almost like an unconscious contract where in order to feel worthy or of value, they had to be useful to the world. And that meant putting their needs below other people's needs. Now, this unconscious contract was an important metaphor because this client happened to work in the legal profession, and therefore they could get the idea that you can have contracts that are written that are disadvantageous to one of the parties. Now, as a lawyer, she knew that if she had this contract, it would not be a good contract. And therefore, we use an element of inner child work to give the younger version of herself a choice of what unconscious contract or what unconscious belief systems she would actually want, and how would that change throughout their life. Now, this involves inner child work, but also forms of timeline therapy. That's very important because what we want to do is not just change how someone thinks about the past, but change how they feel in the present. And we can test that by imagining a future where they don't have to put other people's needs above their own, and they can live life on their terms. And it's very different from doing something as an act of kindness and generosity because you choose to, rather than feeling like you're obliged to. Think of the difference between a martyr and a philanthropist. The martyr has to experience pain or lose something themselves in order to help the greater good, whereas a philanthropist has more resources than they need, and they're able to help others from a position of strength. And I would encourage you to be more philanthropic in how you think rather than more like a martyr, because actually a martyr feels like it's noble and it feels like, oh, I've sacrificed so much. But actually, it's much better to have the metaphor that you can't pour from an empty cup. And if your cup is overflowing, then you have more than enough to give other people, but only if you choose to, not because you have to. So if you can connect to any of these ideas, I think you'll get some value from this session. It was created for a very specific client though, so not all of the suggestions might be suitable for you. So just connect with the ones that really do resonate. And if you do want a session built specifically to you and your requirements, there will be a link in the show notes where you can schedule a free consultation call. We'll have a chat, and who knows, we might end up working together. For now though, find a quiet, comfortable place where you won't be distracted or disturbed. Relax and enjoy the session. Take a deep breath in. And as you breathe in that quiet, calm, relaxing feeling. And as you exhale, give yourself permission to release. Release any feelings of tension, stress, any worries. That's it. Eyelids feeling heavier. And position your body in such a way where relaxation becomes inevitable. That's it. Breathing in relaxation, exhaling tension. That's it. Just loosen the shoulders, the jaw. That's it. And I wonder if you can use the power of your imagination to imagine a color that represents worthiness. Maybe a bright color. And imagine breathing in that color of worthiness. And just imagine, as you exhale, any feelings of unworthiness are slowly leaving your body in your outward breath. That's it. And the deeper you breathe, the more relaxed you feel. And the more relaxed you feel, the deeper you breathe. That's it. As your body relaxes, your imagination awakens. And I want you to imagine a bookshelf filled with history books. And I want you to imagine in one book, in one chapter, there is a book all about the different types of slaves throughout history. Slaves from Asia, Africa, European slaves in Rome, and often a warlord like Genghis Khan would attack a city, and if he was successful, and he almost always was, any survivors were sold into slavery. And I want you to imagine that even back then, a contract was formed. The slave became a possession of the owner, and often they would pay for that slave. But the slave only had value depending on how useful and productive they were. If the slave was useful, the slave wasn't rewarded. That was simply expected. But if the slave wasn't helpful or useful, the slave was often beaten. They were punished for not being valuable, but they weren't rewarded if they were, because of that contract. An implicit contract that says their value is only based on how much value they create. And as you take that in, I want you to get a sense of what that slave would do to survive and to feel safe. They might start to work harder, be more helpful, be more useful, not because it was appreciated. It just felt safer than the alternative. I want you to get a sense that slavery can be a transaction, but it can also be a way of thinking. As you breathe in and breathe out, I want you to imagine floating back to a memory of you as a child. Imagine that you are an invisible observer, just watching the past. Imagine as you breathe in and breathe out, seeing key moments from your childhood, moments of when love and connection was withheld to a child. That's it, breathe in and breathe out. And as you go back to that memory, just imagine that the withholding of love and connection or affection would feel like punishment. And if words of encouragement came when they were helpful or useful or did as they were told, as you observe those key moments from that childhood, you could start to see how that child might form a belief about how they need to be useful, to be valuable, a belief about what it takes to be safe or to survive. And I want you to get a sense that as a child, that child had few options. The child did not have autonomy. The child cannot say, I don't agree to these presuppositions and suggestions. I reject them. The child starts to believe what they're told. The child accepts their reality as if it's real. And just imagine that child becomes a teenager and then a young adult. And even though they're more capable now, more discerning now, what if that seed of an idea has started to become a tree with deep roots? And I want you to get a sense that this all happened in your childhood. I want you to get a sense that you created an unconscious contract that served you when you were a child. It did represent security, safety. But I want you to think how strange it would be to continue doing something as a child, even as an adult. Maybe there was a time as a child that you rode a bike and the bike had training wheels, those stabilizers, and it was useful when you were just 3 or 4 or 5. But you haven't seen an adult ride a bike with big training wheels, because what was useful at one point in your life may not be useful now. I want you to imagine a moment where you were on your own, maybe just 5 or 6 years old, and I want you to meet that younger version of you. And I want you to plant new seeds of an idea. Go back to that younger version of you and tell them that you are them from the future. I want you to tell them that they are worthy just because they exist. Give them a hug. Give them your attention. No conditions, no rules, no hoops to jump through. They are valuable as they are, and let them feel that. And tell them that some people will try and make them feel bad if they don't do what they want them to do. But that is a reflection of their value, not yours. I want you to imagine telling this child that they have 2 contracts that they can agree to. And you might need to explain a contract to a 5 or a 6-year-old, but use words that they would understand, like an agreement, a promise, and show them the first contract. The first contract is that their value is inextricably linked to how much value they create for others. In this contract, they would have to lose in order for someone else to win. But if they're rejected, their self-worth will go down. And this will invite strange dynamics of coercion, control, manipulation, and gaslighting. And I want you to imagine giving this 5 or 6-year-old a crayon and saying that they could sign this first contract, but you've got a better one. And that new contract might say something like, you are valuable simply because you exist. Your value remains whether or not other people benefit from your time, your energy, and emotion. This contract says that you're not a product or a commodity. You are an entity. You are energy, emotion, and value. This contract says that you can have the option to help others, but never the obligation. This contract says, if someone expects or feels entitled to your time, energy, money, thoughts, or opinions, it can and should be rejected. But that contract also says that if they can help, if it's feasible to, and it would be appreciated, then they have the option, without the obligation, to help on their terms. Because when you offer help in that way that's genuinely appreciated, the law of reciprocity says that that person would be willing to help if the roles were reversed. But that's also how you tell who feels entitled to your time and energy and who appreciates it. If when they ask you feel obliged, and when you ask you feel unworthy of even asking, or it's too easy for them to reject, that's not collaboration. That's not reciprocation. That is exploitation. And imagine having these 2 contracts in front of that younger version of you. And be a legal advisor to that younger version of you, because they won't know. Or maybe they do. And when you recommend what would be a more useful, unconscious contract to agree to, give them that brightly coloured crayon and see them sign it in the way that only a 5 or 6 year old could. Seal it with a handshake and a hug. Just imagine what it would feel like to uproot a giant redwood when it was just a sapling, and instead plant a wonderful new tree in the exact location. And I want you to feel that that is happening now. And I want you to imagine what would happen if there was a ripple through space and time from you being a child all the way up to the present. Think of all the key milestones that would have been different. Things you would have felt comfortable saying no to. Things that you would have done for yourself more often. A lack of tolerance for people that would manipulate or exploit, and more time and energy for yourself. And some people believe that you can't pour from an empty cup. And I want you to see a timeline evolve where you put your needs first. Because by putting your needs first, you could be kind and generous from a position of generosity and kindness, not simply to feel a reprieve of feeling any form of self-worth. They say the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, and the next best time is right now. And you can't change the past, but anything you're not changing, you're choosing. So imagine being at your desk and seeing 2 contracts in front of you, and imagine you have a crayon. It's now time for you to decide what unconscious contract you're willing to follow now. A contract where you are a psychological and emotional slave to be used by others, or to be valuable, worthy, autonomous. You prioritize your needs and still can consider the others, but consideration does not mean obligation. You can choose to be a martyr or a philanthropist. You can choose to be a slave or an empowered entrepreneur, living life on your terms. And just imagine that small child in the room with you, and she's now coaching you, urging you to not sign that unconscious contract that was never signed to begin with. You just acted as if it was. And if you're ready to commit to that new agreement with yourself, let me know by nodding your head. And get a glimpse of your future now. Imagine seeing a future where it's fine for you to say no. Fine for you to have clear boundaries. You can spend your time, your money, your energy doing things you want to do. And if people ask, see that future version of you, figuring out if you want to help, if it's feasible for you to help, and if it would be appreciated. And I want you to see a confident version of you being more than willing to say no to anything that takes you back to a version of you that you've broken free from. Because if you were a slave and you were given your freedom, how likely is it that you would choose voluntarily to become that slave again? So take your freedom. You've earned it. You deserve it. And you have permission from yourself to yourself to enjoy your freedom. As you hold that thought, just imagine floating all the way back to the present, to the here and the now. Take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your nose. That's it. Wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes, start to connect and calibrate into the here and the now. As I now count from 1 to 10 to awaken you, you will awaken feeling full of value, self-worth, with a wonderful feeling of freedom, liberation, and excitement for the future. Starting to count. 1, 2, 3, waking up. 4, 5, 6, more alert. 7, 8, open your eyes, open your eyes. 9, 10, wide awake, wide awake, wide awake. Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of The Hypnotist. If you've enjoyed this episode or got some value from it, please give it a 5-star rating and review. And maybe you know someone that would also benefit from this particular episode, in which case share the episode with them so they can also get the benefit too. And if you would like to listen to this episode where it's just the hypnosis, so no intro, no outro, no explanation, just the hypnosis and completely ad-free, there will be a link in the description where you can subscribe at a very low cost and only get access to the hypnosis. So if that's of interest, please check that out. Thank you again for being a regular listener of The Hypnotist, and I'll see you again soon for more.